as my friends were starting to, come into school and say they were seeing boys, I was having these feelings for girls. So I started really understanding that I was having those feelings in my teenage years. I went to church in February 2015, and I heard a sermon where we were challenged as to whether we'd actually opened every door to Jesus. And I recognised that I'd opened every door but one, and the one was my sexuality.
Somebody coming out of an LGBT identity, they're a new Christian, and it's, oh, well, you just need to meet the right girl. And then within 3 months, they're getting a lot of pressure put on them. They need to start dating. They need to, to do this and that. I think it's with the best of intentions, possibly.
I saw what I needed to see, which was people who had the Holy Spirit, and that's what attracted me. And had I gone into a gay affirming church, I know that I wouldn't have seen that.
I've often wondered, for me, same-sex attraction, was it necessarily an attraction towards men in the beginning, or was it a rejection of women? Was it a rejection of the female? Now, those are two very different things.
I found a church who didn't condemn me, but they didn't affirm me. They just gave me space to find Jesus for myself.
Quote-unquote celibate gay Christian movement and some of these other ones, they don't believe in transformation. They don't believe that the change is really possible. So it's just they've got, in my view, a self-imposed ceiling over their head in terms of what they really believe that God can do for them.
Went to one of their meetings, and I found very much that they didn't really believe in transformation. So I felt that it was very much about, this is how you manage it. The aim of Christianity is holiness, not heterosexuality. And I think, if we can just let people know that actually we just want that walk with Jesus, that closeness. The aim isn't to make anyone straight, but actually God changes us. He doesn't leave us where we're at.
Whether you're joining us through Love and Truth Network or through our sister ministry, Transforming Congregations, we're so glad that you're here. I'm Jeremiah Sheppard. I'm the Director of Operations for Love and Truth Network. I'm filling in for Gary Ingram this week. Gary is actually on a ministry trip back east. He's doing some ministry work there, equipping pastors and church leaders, doing some preaching in the churches. He's even doing some work with moms and dads, parents, doing some very important work there. So glad that you're able to join us today. And I'm especially excited. We have a very special guest here with us today, Sarah Sedgwick. I wanted to actually have her on our program for a long time. So I'm so glad the stars aligned and we were able to have her on today. So Sarah is the director and founder of a ministry based out of the United Kingdom called Transformed by God's Love. She's also the author of 2 books, one of them also entitled Transformed by God's Love, which is her personal testimony. And she's also very recently published Smoke and Mirrors, A Church Deceived Over Sexuality. So we'll be excited to talk about the book as well. But Sarah, it's awesome. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me, Jeremiah. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you here. So there's so much that I'd like to go over with you today. But for those people in our audience who don't know you, haven't heard of Transform, so if you can just take a little while, I'd love to hear some of your personal story, some of the testimony, and kind of what brought you where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So my personal story is one of being brought up in a Christian family. So I was brought up in England on the south coast, and we were regular churchgoers. Both my parents were heavily involved in church. So my mum was a teacher, school teacher, so she was obviously heavily involved in the kind of church, the junior church, all the kids stuff. And Dad was a preacher, and he was also a deacon and eventually an elder of the church. So heavily involved, older brother, older sister, went to everything to do with church. We went there. And I loved church. I really enjoyed it. But the truth was that my dad at home was very different from the dad we'd see on a Sunday morning in church. So Dad was violent and aggressive towards my mum. He was emotionally abusive to us kids, physically violent, more so to my brother. And I just couldn't kind of understand what Christianity had, because he was hypocritical and what I was seeing wasn't the love of Jesus, the love of God. And so I never connected with God. I never had a personal relationship with him. So I enjoyed church. I enjoyed seeing my friends, singing the songs. But that was all it came to. It was kind of like a head knowledge that God existed, but not a personal experience of Jesus. And in my kind of teenage years, probably 13, 14, I was always sporty. I played every sport going. And my PE teacher said to me, do you want to come to play sport for an adult club? And so I went. And that was my first experience, really, of lesbians. I was brought up kind of, this was late 70s, early 80s. So it wasn't like it is today. Everything was very closeted and hidden away. And as I started seeing these women, they seemed to be happy. They seemed to have very stable relationships on the surface. They seemed to have a lot more than my parents did. And I think it was subconscious to start with. But as my friends were starting to, come into school and say they were seeing boys, I was having these feelings for girls. So I started really understanding that I was having those feelings in my teenage years. And I probably knew from church that this wasn't good. It wasn't what God wanted for me. I probably made the mistake of going and looking in my dad's massive big Bible concordance and looking up the word homosexuality and seeing the Leviticus verse that says this is an abomination. And in my young mind, I was just an abomination, and God couldn't love me and didn't love me. And so I had a choice to make, really. When I late teenage years, just as I was going off to college, I stopped going to church. And because I'd never made a connection with God, it was like, well, do I carry on going to church and going that way, or do I follow my heart and these desires that I had? So I went to university, which was probably about 200 miles away from my family. And that's where I just threw myself into the gay scene. I found my first girlfriend, was clubbing, drinking a lot, going out. So I was really on the scene quite heavily. And from there on in, I kind of turned my back on God, stopped going to church fully. On occasion, when I went home, my mum might persuade me, but very rare. And I decided I'd do life without him. And therein kind of followed, a number of years of me having different relationships, pursuing kind of the dream of my career. I was very career minded, so I'd be pushing for that. And I was kind of quite heavily in the scene, in the sports scene as well, where there was a lot of lesbians. And I was kind of happy. If you'd asked me at the time, I'd have said I was really happy. Actually, underneath it all, I'd started self-harming as a child, and that would rear its ugly head every so often. And I was also bulimic for a number of years. So I had mental health issues that were kind of squashed down and hidden away. In 1999, I actually met someone who was going to become my civil partner. So it was before gay weddings were allowed in the UK. You could have a civil partnership from, I think, the end of 2005. So 2006, we had a civil partnership. We lived together. We had a mortgage. We had a house, and we were pretty happy. And we were together for 16 years. And I wasn't looking for God. I wasn't pursuing him. I was kind of trundling away in my life. And one day I came home from work and I just retuned the radio. And I heard a song that I recognized from church from when I'd been a child. And I was intrigued. So I listened to the end of it, and I found a Christian radio station here in the UK called Premier Christian Radio. And as I listened to that, they said, oh, we're going to have a teaching piece now. And it was somebody called Joyce Meyer, who, of course, I'm sure you're aware of. And her style kind of just sucked me right in. She's very to the point. She speaks in a certain way. She doesn't mince her words. So I listened. And at the end, they said, come back tomorrow and you can hear a bit more of Joyce Meyer. And so I listened to the end of the week. And thereafter, it became my radio station of choice. And I was listening on into the afternoon. And I was hearing about a God who could love me. A God who wasn't going to put those barriers up because of my sexuality. They weren't actually talking about sexuality, but I was beginning to understand a bit more about him. And I was talking to him as I used to walk my dog, and I'd kind of have conversations with God. And after a period of time, I felt him saying, "Go to church." And I said, "No, that's not going to happen. I'm gay. I'm not going to be welcomed in church, and I don't want to do it." And then he said, over time, he kept gently pressing, "I want you to go to church." So eventually, I kind of thought, okay, and I went and spoke to my partner. And I said, "Hey, you know what? I think I want to go to church." And she was an atheist, and she said, "Well, that's fine, so long as it doesn't involve me." So one Sunday in August 2014, I went off to church. Hesitated outside for quite a long time, as you do, but plucked up the courage to go in. And therein started a few months of going to church every Sunday and seeing people who had something that I hadn't got. Seeing people who were really filled with the Holy Spirit, who were happy, content, they were on fire for God. And I was beginning to think, well, that's what I want. I want to be like that. I could see what Christianity could offer. But all the while, I was wrestling with God over my sexuality. So I was Googling, can I be a gay Christian? And I was finding all sorts of things on the internet, as you can probably imagine, from people who would totally affirm you and say, absolutely, you can do anything you want, through to people who were saying, well, you're an abomination anyway, so there's no point trying. And it was a real journey of discovery for me. Eventually, I went to church in February 2015, and I heard a sermon where we were challenged as to whether we'd actually opened every door to Jesus. And I recognized that I'd opened every door but one, and the one was my sexuality. And it really challenged me quite deeply. But I didn't go up for the altar call. I went home and I talked to God about it over the next few days. And eventually I got to that point of thinking I need to really ask him directly. And so I prayed and I said, what about my sexuality? And God really showed me that this wasn't his design for me. It wasn't his best for me. And that wasn't a difficult thing. He didn't do it in a big, kind of hit you with a stick way. It was a very gentle, loving, but he really did show me. So therein, I had to go and have a conversation with my partner and explained to her that I've been going to church and I really want to become a Christian, at which she was quite horrified because she was an atheist anyway. But then I explained to her that for me, having a relationship with Jesus meant that I couldn't have a relationship with her. And that was a tough old conversation to have. We'd been together 16 years and she was angry, she was upset, she was confused. She really didn't know what to make of it. But after we'd had that conversation, a little while later, I went upstairs and I did pray and I asked Jesus into my life. It was like a weight lifted from me as I made that decision to invite him into my life. But I'll always describe it as the best day of my life and the worst day of my life, because in receiving Jesus, I lost my relationship. But we were quite emotionally dependent. We were quite financially dependent upon each other. And so I didn't move out immediately. I prayed for God to surround me with really strong Christian women to help me. And we muddled through, me and my partner, for probably 2 years of very difficult times where we moved from being very, very dependent upon each other to being housemates, living in the same house. And then eventually God made a way for her to get her own home and for us to move. She moved 200 miles away from me. But God was good and gracious in that time. And really, from when I gave my life to the Lord, He did surround me with very good people. He put me in a very strong church, and a church where they were very strong on discipleship. So I was discipled well, I was supported, I was held accountable. And over time, I developed my faith, I grew in my faith, and God put on my heart to set up Transform Ministries, Transformed by God's Love. And that was in November 2019. And, from then on in, it's been a roller coaster, really, of moving with him, listening to him, and really getting ourselves in a position where we can follow his guidance but support other people in many different guises.
Wow. I mean, my gosh, there's so much to unpack there. Sarah, what kind of fascinates me about your stories, there's a lot of testimonies of younger people, they've been in the LGBT world for a while. Jesus gets a hold of them, late teens, early 20s. And by the way, I'm certainly not minimizing
Mhm.
that at all. I mean,
Yeah.
praise the Lord, he gets a hold of some of these folks before they go through
Mhm.
decades of brokenness the way that you and I did. But for your particular, in your case, that was, it wasn't like that. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe, so you're in your 50s by this point. You do have a long-term partner, you have a mortgage, you have finances that are combined. I mean, you have this whole life that you built together. And from a secular standpoint, and probably even some Christians, you could have easily have said, Lord, this is too much. I love you. I'm going to go to church on Sundays, but you can't, how can I possibly get out of, my whole life? I mean, you're asking me to upend my whole life completely. And I just don't think that I can do that. And quite frankly, like I said, a lot of people may be like, you know what, Sarah, we understand, how could you, it's too risky at this stage in your life to try to start over again. You and her have been together for a long time. So you could have gone down that road. You could have tried to be a Christian and all of that. But from what it sounds like to me, there was a call for radical
Mhm.
obedience. And I know you mentioned, it was a process, but just was there a seminal moment? Was it just kind of a long drawn out? How was it that you were willing to leave the safety and security of a long term relationship, the finances, the all of that, to completely walk away? I mean, walking away from
Mhm.
all of that.
I don't think I really thought it through, that the real impact of what my decision would be. I I thought it through in a lot of ways in terms of what, can I be a gay Christian and could I keep identifying in that way? But I never thought through, I don't think, that the kind of full impact of having that conversation with her and saying it's finished. And I was very naive. I mean, I'll be honest with you, for a few weeks after that, we shared a bed still. It wasn't sexual, but we still would share the bed. We were still very close. We would still kind of rely on each other for things. So I think for me, it was almost like to start with a minute by minute surrender to God and being tuned into Him. What I love about him was that he was very gentle and his timings were always perfect. So he didn't ask me to stop everything at the same time. He didn't say, at this moment, walk out of this
Wow.
house and never look back. He paved the way for every conversation. He'd put on my heart, you need to talk about one thing, my wedding ring. After a period of time, you need to talk about your wedding ring. You need to not wear the wedding ring and take that off. So it was little things, little by little. And I think so for me, it came from a place of, yes, I want to follow you, not fully recognizing what surrender and sacrifice meant, but just taking it day by day and not trying to look too far. And also there was a lot of prayer that went into it from myself. I mean, I knew what my ultimate exit was going to be. I knew that we would split up and I knew that we'd have to, but I had no idea how it was going to happen. So one of my regular prayers was, God, can you make this happen? I don't know how it's going to happen. But also I had a lot of prayers of support from people who would encourage me and not condemn me, because I know that I've met some other Christians who come out of long-term relationships and they've had churches that have really pressured them to split up straight away. And that's been probably the thing that pushed them back into the scene. So I think it's really good that my church were very good at recognizing that, yes, we still lived in the same home, but they trusted me that actually that was all it was. So, yeah, I would say to somebody, seek Jesus and just go a day at a time. And if it has to be a minute at a time to start with or an hour at a time, then do it that way.
And I love to hear that, because I mean, for anybody watching or listening, let's say you are at a later stage in your life and the Lord's getting a hold of you, but you may be thinking it's too late for me to change. I've got too much invested with this. It's like standing at the base of Mount Everest and trying to
Mm.
look at the top and figure out how to get there to walk this out. But it wasn't like that with you. The Lord didn't put a 100-mile mountain and tell you to just start climbing by yourself. So it sounds like it was just a small surrender, a small obedience. But those quote unquote small things that you were doing led up to very big changes in your life over time. And it doesn't, yes, there was heartache. I'm sure there was a lot of trepidation there, but it doesn't sound like you got destroyed in the process. It doesn't sound like it was so overwhelming and terrible to try to follow Jesus. It was just bit by bit by bit by bit. He walked out your sanctification
Yeah,
with you.
absolutely. And what's the beauty of that is from the ashes come the beauty. That my ex and I are now best friends, albeit we live a long way away from each other. And she gave her life to Jesus 7 years after I did. So,
Oh
yeah,
my God. So don't mean to interrupt you, but let me get this straight. So the atheist ex-girlfriend who was pretty militant about not believing in anything and, pretty upset when you became a Christian, and she is now a believer.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. She rang me one day, and in the UK, we have something called Alpha. I don't know if you have it in the States, but it's a exploring Christianity course that a lot of churches run. And she rang me one day out of the blue and said, "Oh, I'm going to this Alpha course at the local church." And I mean, you could have knocked me down with a feather when she said that. And then, yeah, a few months later, she made her own commitment. So, God can redeem
Wow, that's
everything. God
amazing.
can redeem. And I've seen that with other people as well who I've known have had similar journeys.
So what did it look like? Because I do want to talk about your
Mhm,
ministry in just a moment, but okay, so at this stage in your life, so you and her have separated. You're starting out as a single
mhm.
person, not only as a single person, but as a new believer. So tell us just a little bit about for those first couple of years. What was that like in terms of growing with the Lord, or what were some of the challenges? What were some of the blessings? What was it like for those first few years post relationship?
It was hard. It was lonely at times. Even though I could be surrounded with people, it could be lonely. But God put an amazing group of women in my life, and they were supportive, they were loving, they were caring, and because we had regular meetings, um,
Hmm.
it was I was uplifted and held, so that was powerful. But I won't lie, there were times of kind of being kind of despairing or lonely, which I had to work through with God. And I think sometimes God used those to draw me closer to Him, because I was in the habit of, as soon as anything went wrong, I'd turn to somebody else. And I feel that God used some of those times for me to actually learn how to lean into Him and to rely on Him more.
So, Sarah, if you don't mind my asking, so during that time, I know you previously mentioned there were some mental health issues, some
Hmm.
self harm, bulimia, things like that. So, what does that look like since becoming a Christian? Is that still a thing? Is that not a thing? What that aspect of your life? How is that going
Yeah.
now?
So when I first became a Christian, it actually became worse before it got better, because there was so much turmoil going on, with my splitting up with my partner, with my not understanding what that looked like, that actually I found it a lot harder. But within 2 years, I was totally free of all self harm and all bulimia. So yeah, it was difficult initially, but I also had Christian counselling. And the counselling wasn't about my sexuality. It was actually about things that were triggering from my childhood. I spoke earlier about my dad being a violent and angry man, and I had issues there. But the Christian counselling actually helped me as well with bulimia and with the self harm. So, I had support there as well. But yeah, totally free. Not something I even think about anymore.
Oh, that is so good, and I'm so
Hmm.
glad you had that community to come
Hmm.
around you. So, it is interesting though. So, Sarah, I have to ask. Okay, so it's one thing to become a Christian. It's have that conversion. That's amazing. It's quite another to form a ministry that head on addresses an area that a lot of churches don't want to come near with a 10-foot
Hmm.
pole. It's either we'll affirm it or we're just not going to talk
Hmm.
about it. Sometimes it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot in between. How did Transform by God's Love come about, and just kind of what was the vision that laid on your heart? And just tell us a little more about that in terms of your forming the ministry and what's transpired
Mm.
since then.
I look back and it was never on my heart to do this. It kind of crept up on me, if I'm honest. But what happened was yeah,
Really?
I was
Wow.
part of the Methodist Church in the UK. And I'm sure you've gone through the same thing, I know, in the States, but they were going through a whole big process of same sex marriage and consultation over same sex marriage. And the church I was in was very against same sex marriage. And so I was actually asked to go and speak at a couple of events to share my testimony. And I was very raw and very young in my faith. I found it quite difficult. But when I shared my testimony, I started to recognize that people thought differently. And I hadn't understood that. I had thought that, most of the Christians who I met in the churches I was in would be agreeing in agreement with, that it was wrong. But that wasn't what I was finding. And people were asking me questions. And I was actually finding that there was a lot of ignorance and a lot of people who were actually hungry to know my story and the truth and what had happened to me and how God had transformed me. And so from that, um, I started to recognize there was a need. So I think that was kind of the first thing. And then the second thing was I watched a video from in the UK. We have something called the Christian Institute, who do a lot of lobbying for Christian justice and social issues. And they sent out in their newsletter a video, and it was a young lady from the States who used to be a lesbian who'd become a Christian. And I sent them an email just saying, thank you so much for sharing that, because it was the first thing of its like I'd seen. And I would love to see some British stories, because I'm British and I would love to, know that there's other people around. And they contacted me and said, well, can we video your story? So I was like, prayed about it and thought, well, okay. And so they shared my story, did about, I think it was about a 15-minute video. And from that, people started contacting me, people who had the same journey as me in the UK, and who were saying, wow, great. Can we get in contact? Can we talk? And one of the issues I'd had when I first became a Christian was I had looked for support in the UK, and I did find an organization, and I went to one of their meetings, and I found very much that they didn't really believe in transformation. So I felt that it was very much about, this is how you manage it. And I was like, well, no, I believe God transforms us. I believe God changes us. And so I didn't find that the right support for me. I found that really quite challenging. I actually went away, I'd gone to London, and on the train on the way home, I was quite upset over it, thinking, well, is there no hope? And I met other people through doing this video who were of the same mind. And it was just before lockdown that we started TBGL. And I thought, we had a little Facebook group with just a few people on it who I had contact me. And I thought, well, let's do some Zooms, because there's no church. It's locked down. It would be nice to have a bit of community. And that's how that part just started off, because nobody wanted to finish the Zooms when lockdown had finished. And we kind of grew organically from that. So that was how TBGL first started, to offer support to other people, overcomers, or people in the LGBT community who were interested in faith and wanting to find out more. And then from that, I had parents start to contact us, that they had children who were living in LGBTQ, and how did they help them? How do they support them? How do they talk to them? And I still had the desire to speak to churches. So through what I'd done with the Methodist Church, other doors open. So TBGL has three kind of foundation stones. One is overcomers, the second one's family, and the third one's churches. So that's how it's evolved, and that's our desire to just support and help people. And I call it a spacious place. I think it's Psalm 18:19, which says, he brought me into a spacious place because he delighted in me. I found a church who didn't condemn me, but they didn't affirm me. They just gave me space to find Jesus for myself. And that's what I want to encourage people to be able to do in churches, or parents, to not condemn, not push people down one place, but just make that space for them to meet with Jesus. So that's the passion behind it, and that's where we're going.
No, I'm so glad that you're doing that. I know something that's very, I don't know, very near and dear to my heart is, okay, especially with the younger people. The world's just completely gone crazy with the LGBT, plus plus plus
Hmm.
alphabet soup, whatever. But in this case, let's say that the Lord is getting a hold of the heart of a young person, and they may come to church for the very first time, and then they hear one. And I'm not even going to dignify them by
Hmm.
mentioning names, but I mean, there's several out there
Yeah.
that are, okay, well, the scriptures have been translated wrong, and
Hmm.
God not only tolerate same-sex relationships, but as long as it's loving and monogamous, the Lord actually celebrates that. You can be gay and you can be Christian
Mm.
at the same time. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of confusion that's out there, and I mean, not to get dramatic here, but it really, I think that in some cases this can have an eternal
Yep.
impact on somebody.
Agreed.
So the fact that you're there and you're willing to kind of speak truth to that, but also you're not going to the other extreme of, because I've heard some of this too, you know, a young person, or not even young, but let's just say somebody coming out of an LGBT identity, they're a new Christian, and it's, oh, well, you just need to meet the right girl. And then within 3 months, they're getting a lot of pressure put on them. They need to
Mm-hmm.
start dating. They need to, you know, to do this and that. I think it's with the best of intentions, possibly, but the absolute worst prescription for helping somebody kind of walk this out. So just what are your thoughts there in practical, actionable things that a church can do to minister to this community, not in an affirming way, also not in a hitting them over the head with a Bible
Mm-hmm.
kind of way. What would you say are some of the recommendations that you might have, whether it's a small church, mid-sized
Mm-hmm.
church, a mega church, but for somebody that walks through their doors, they don't know much about Christ, but they know they're feeling
Mm-hmm.
something. They're feeling that
Mm-hmm.
draw.
One of the things I always say to churches is that people coming out of the gay community have a hugely supportive and loving community behind them. And I think that if churches can truly be community to people in a real sense of the word, not just on a Sunday morning, oh, we love you, it's lovely to see you, put my arm around you, but actually invite you around for dinner in the week, go out for coffee, really take interest in you, become spiritual parents to you. I think we have to be real community and not just give a voice to it. We need to really be community for people, but also it's that judgment element. It's funny, I've just actually been to see somebody today who is wanting to come to church, somebody local to me, and has been condemned by another church as soon as they walked in the door. And so we just need to make, yeah,
Really?
and we just
Wow.
need to make sure that the greeters on the door are able to greet with real passion and with real love, without condemnation, through to, what are we preaching? I know there's somebody in one of our groups who said that when her and her ex-wife used to go to church together, within 3 weeks the next sermon would be on homosexuality, and so they would walk out of that church and try another one because it was so pointed and so directed at them. So I think it's not making this person about their sin. It's about getting to know the real person, getting to know what makes them tick, loving them, drawing them into community, and then having the conversations. I mean, there's another saying that says, you can't drive the truck over the bridge until you built the bridge. And so we can't have difficult conversations with people until we've built that bridge, and that bridge is relationship. So yeah, build proper and strong relationships with people.
Oh, absolutely. And also, I love what you've said, because there is some hope to offer people, because not a lot, but there's a significant population. Okay, they're Christians, they're devoted to Christ now, but it's, well, okay, I still have same sex attraction. This is still
Mm.
here. I guess this is just my life, and I'm just going to try to manage it like I would manage diabetes. So, but, and that's fine, but the quote unquote celibate gay Christian movement and some of these other ones, they don't believe in transformation. They don't believe that for themselves, at least, the change is really possible. So it's just they've got, in my view, a self-imposed
Mm-hmm.
ceiling over
Yeah.
their head in terms of what they really believe that God can do for them. So may I ask, I mean, have you, because it doesn't sound like there was a lot of opposite sex attraction in your life from very early on, from what you've described. So have you noticed a change in your attractions, romantic or otherwise? What does some of that look like for you in your
Yeah,
journey?
for sure. Initially, I was very blocked off to it, so I put that ceiling up on myself to start with. I was like, "Yeah, God, I've come out of that, but I'll never be straight, and I'll never want to marry a man." And then I went to an event a couple of years in, and a woman prophesied over me that God had already chosen a husband for me, and I was like, "No way,
Wow,
that's not
I
happening."
love that.
Uh, and then, over time, and, I've been a Christian now for 9 years. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I have started having physical attraction for men. So it didn't happen immediately. I lost the attraction for women after a couple of years. And then I would say I was kind of fighting it with God for a little while of, I'm never going to get married. And part of that was my issues with my dad and my issues with what a husband was and what that looked like. And now I'm very open. I do have attractions toward guys. If I met the right guy, I would be very open to it. So I have definitely seen attractions, but it wasn't a click of the finger thing. It was a gradual change. And part of that came from my mindset.
So Sarah, and I know in my story at least, I don't want to put this on somebody else, but I've often wondered, just with the way that I was brought up, the some of the horrendous things that happen, particularly with my mother. I've often wondered, for me, same-sex attraction, was it necessarily an attraction towards men in the beginning, or was it a rejection of women? Was it a rejection of the
Mhm.
female? And those are two very different things. So has the Lord revealed anything in terms of that in your own story? Was it really so much that you were drawn towards women and that's just how it was? Or was it men aren't safe, my own father's not safe, so therefore by default, men as a whole, I'm just going to reject there? Or has that not really been something that has crossed your mind a whole
No,
lot?
it's definitely a rejection of men, and God's revealed that to me. And I can look back now and see key moments in my life. One of which I remember after one particularly violent row that him and my mum had had, just screaming, "I will never get married," and it was almost like a self prophecy, that I will never get married. And it was a fear of men. It was an anger at how he treated people, his whole attitude, and I think it was like a protective bubble that I put up over myself. So when I got into the situation where I could see women, and like I said, I could see that on the surface they seemed to have wonderful relationships. It all seemed very safe. And so yeah, definitely it was a rejection and a fear of men that pushed me down that avenue.
And when you were in the life, was that a common experience with a lot of the other lesbian identified women that you came across?
I think, when I talk to my close friends, or when I did, when I was still in the lifestyle, and I hear all their stories, um, I think a lot, yes. I mean, I think everybody has a story, and there are various factors that you can see coming in. I think rejection plays a big part. I felt rejected by my dad because of the way he acted, but I also know somebody whose mum walked out on her when she was 8 years old, and she was left with a father. So I think rejection can be a huge thing. But yes, I do think it is as common for women to be fearful of men. I know girls who've been raped. I know women who've come out of abusive marriages who've gone into lesbian relationships. So I think it often can be. This is a safety net.
Understood. So definitely for anybody listening, anybody watching, if you've had some of those experiences in your life, and it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. But if you feel like this other gender is not safe for me, and I quite frankly I can't even imagine, how could I ever be attracted to a woman, or how could I ever be attracted to a man? The very thought of it just terrifies me. So don't tell me if I walk into church that's just going to be the expectation right away. No, we just want to tell people, no, that's not going to be the expectation. The Lord is certainly not looking for that, but we want you to know that there is safety and there is hope for you, and hope in Jesus, that whatever you've gone through, whatever rejections you've had, whatever ways that you've rejected, or you've put up a kind of a protective barrier around yourself, like Sarah did, like I have, just to try to keep yourself from being harmed. There is hope for you, and there is love for
Mm,
you in God's house. So I just really want to make sure that's clear to anybody listening to us today, because I feel like that's
mm.
important.
I think as well, Jeremiah, the whole thing is that the aim of Christianity is holiness, not heterosexuality. And I think, if we can just let people know that actually we just want that walk with Jesus, that closeness, the aim isn't to make anyone straight, but actually God changes us. He doesn't leave us where we're at.
Amen to that. So I promised Gary too, because he knows me
Hmm.
very well. My boss does. So I promised him I wouldn't get too much into politics with today's conversation, but I did want to ask you about, I know certainly here in the United States, there's a lot of the quote unquote conversion therapy bans that have come up, literal laws being drawn up that could put ministries like mine, like yours, completely out of business. I mean, from a federal and state level, just some very targeted hostility, not to mention the media. So we experience a lot of that here in the United States. Now, from what I've heard, just from this side of the pond, the UK, it's even worse. It seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's even a little more militant in that regard. So what has been your experience just in terms of whether it's laws, whether I know you've spoken to some of your MPs over there. So what does that look like just in terms of the legislative and legal challenges that somebody with your background that is speaking against the prevailing narrative, what does that look like?
At the moment, we're okay. We can continue talking. But what's been happening over the last couple of years is a very intensive push from a certain lobby group to get conversion therapy banned within the UK. Now, I agree, conversion therapy in its real sense should be banned, and it is already, everything as part of it is illegal, but they're including talking therapies, anything that wouldn't affirm LGBT,
Mm-hmm.
and they're also talking about prayer, funnily enough, that you cannot pray for somebody. So there's been a real push, but God's pushed back every time it's gone to the criminal justice bill, which it's part of, to go, there's something being amended or changed and it's been kicked back. And then it was going to go through a few weeks ago, and 2 days before they were going to talk about it, they called a general election in the UK. So God's protected us so far. But I don't know if you know, we had a general election in the UK yesterday. The Labour Party have got in, and part of their manifesto is to ban conversion therapy. So we are in a
Wow.
situation where I think it will be brought before Parliament fairly quickly. My MP, who I spoke to last year, is a Christian, and I was able to talk to him, and he's very supportive of what we do. But I've got a new MP now after the election, so who's not a Christian. So I will be trying to speak to him fairly quickly, and trying to explain the situation and get support. So I think in the UK we're going to need prayer for that, because something's gonna come through sooner or later. There's a big push for it to happen.
No, absolutely, and also just to clarify for anybody listening, Sarah, I don't want to speak for
Hmm.
you, but I'll certainly for myself personally, for Love and Truth Network, we fully recognize the late '70s, the early '80s when conversion therapy was happening. Yes, I mean electroshock
Hmm.
therapy happening, usually on homosexual men, but on a lot of them. All kinds of abuses, all kinds of, almost psychological torture. That's not what we're talking about. We absolutely condemn anything like that, whether it's for a homosexual person or any kind of abuses going on like that in a supposedly therapeutic setting. We don't support that at all. The problem is they're taking this label of conversion therapy and they're calling it that. But to Sarah's point just now, it's okay if you pray with somebody that's struggling with something pertaining to homosexuality. Oh, well, that's conversion therapy. A talk therapist who wants to talk to a child who's feeling confused about their gender, who's feeling confused about their sexuality, and it's just a matter of talk therapy to help them navigate. Oh, that's conversion therapy, unless you're telling them go be gay, and that's what the umbrella that they have put all of this stuff under, and they're trying to equate that to what was done previously, and that's where we want to draw the line, and that's where we need to make sure our lawmakers at every level are aware. They're being told this narrative that they think they're doing a moral thing by stopping these tortures and these abuses from happening. But what's actually in these bills is it's talk therapy. It's, I mean, anything else that a therapist could normally do outside of this issue is now trying to be banned, and they're calling that a conversion therapy ban. So just to be clear what our position is on that, but also just to clarify for anybody listening who might be confused, okay, this is not what it's being made out to be. What they're trying to ban is, whether it's on a ministerial level, in the UK, Sarah just said you can't even, if this goes through, you won't even be able to pray with somebody, as insane as that is.
Yeah.
Or if you do try to help somebody walk out of their particular issues with sexuality, transgenderism, whatever, you can have your license pulled
Mhm.
if they get their way. So this is a very clever but very insidious way that they're trying to get this to go through.
Mhm. Yeah, they're even talking about stopping preachers from preaching on anything from the Bible that might pertain to sexuality.
Wow, okay, that part I had not heard. So you're telling me in the United Kingdom,
Hmm.
preaching from the pulpit on this topic, they're trying to get banned?
They're trying to get that banned as well.
Oh wow. Okay.
Mm.
So, Sarah, your book, Smoke and Mirrors, A Church Deceived Over Sexuality. So,
Hmm.
again, this is so Sarah Sedgwick. So, she's going to leave the lifestyle, she's going to form a ministry, and then she's going to write a very excellent book about, because you have so much free time on your hands these days. But so, tell us some more about Smoke and Mirrors. So, what was kind of the impetus that drove you to write the book? And tell our audience, what are some things that you're passionate about, or some of the things that you've identified within the church that led you to write your manuscript?
Hmm. What led me to write it was a level of frustration over the deception. I fail to see sometimes how Christians cannot understand the teaching in the Bible, that there will come false teachers. There will come a time where people will surround themselves with what their itching ears want to hear. There'll come a time where people will call good evil and evil good. And we're in those times. And it came from a level of frustration of, why can people not see what's in front of their eyes? And literally, I was actually sitting in the hair salon. And you know how sometimes if you look in the mirror in front of you, and hair salons have mirrors all around, and you can see the mirror behind you, and then you can see lots and lots of reflections coming back at you. And it was at that point I felt God say smoke and mirrors. And I looked it up, and it's an old illusion trick that magicians use to make an illusion, make something look like it's happening when it's not really happening. And that was kind of God giving me the title for it. And then I thought about God. We talk about God as being in the Israelites. He came in the cloud of smoke, and he's a holy God, and the smoke fills the temple. And then you've got this smoke screen, this kind of deception of Satan. So I tried to kind of mirror smoke and looking at the good and bad of smoke. And then mirrors is, well, God, we are to mirror God. We are to try and be holy. But Satan uses these kind of distorted mirrors. You might get them in a hall of mirrors at a fun fair, and everything's distorted. And so I used that as kind of the premise for the book, trying to help people to understand that there is a lot of deceit going on, and looking and unpacking that deceit, but also asking some questions. The writing's on the wall. So where are the Daniels who are going to interpret the writing? We knew the Bible said there is false teaching. Where are the brave pastors who are going to stand up? Because I don't know about you, Jeremiah, but in the UK, there's not many brave pastors who will stand up and preach on this or speak truth. A lot of them fudge an answer or kind of skirt around the edges. So
Yeah, it's a very watered down
yeah,
gospel. And a lot of, for this issue at least, it's very
yeah,
watered down.
absolutely. So challenge there. Challenge about idols. We have made an idol of LGBT. You see some cartoons sometimes of the LGBT statue and people bowing down to it. It's another kind of reference to Daniel, but I believe it's become the huge idol of the day. And there's so much fear around actually challenging that, but we need to be, as they were in the book of Daniel, refusing to bow down. Even if it means we go in the lion's den, then we should be doing that as Christians. Looking at distractions and how Satan uses the kind of art distraction to pull us away, and not really focus on these really important issues. So it's a challenging book in that way. It seeks to educate. It seeks to help people to really pull apart the scriptures. But also at the end of each chapter, we've got a testimony of somebody who's come out of LGBTQ, and they link in where they were stuck in idolatry or where they were stuck in pride. And so they all link in. So they give it a kind of personal feel as well. So the book's there for those who may be on the fence, not really sure, for pastors who really want to look into this in a deeper level and have some meat, to really start teaching their church congregations with, and for anybody who's questioning, anybody who's in LGBT or any overcomers, just to look at it. So it's kind of broad brush in terms of whom it's aimed at, but it is a challenging read.
No, I'm so glad that you willing to talk about that, because, and I want to make it clear with what I'm about to say. This is my personal conviction. Jeremiah Sheppard. This is not the official position of Gary Ingram or Love and Truth Network, but on a personal level, I've been of the opinion for a long time. And as much as we've talked about the hostile politicians and the laws, and those things are real, but we could deal with those. We could survive those. What I believe is the issue of sexual immorality, the idolatry that's there in the United States. I would love to hear your take on the Christian churches in the UK. I personally believe the idol of sexual immorality is what's rotting the church from within. And if it were to, God forbid, it were to ever fall completely, it's not going to be the ACLU putting us out of business. It's not going to be Islam. It's not going to be a hostile government. This is the issue that is just rotting the church from within. And by the way, I'm not just talking about LGBT. I mean, that's a big part of it, but heterosexual brokenness, the absolute pandemic of pornography use among Christians, among pastors. This is what's rotting us. This is what's going to bring us down. It's not going to be we get attacked from outside. It's going to be we're imploding over this. And there's hope to that. The Lord's not just sitting idly by, but this is where we're at today. That's at least what I see happening in the United States in terms of where the church is at. But UK, I know, very similar, America and the United Kingdom, but there's also some very big cultural differences, especially in the church. So that's what I see over here. But what are you seeing over there in the United Kingdom in terms of the church and sexuality?
I would echo everything you said. I think it mirrors it it's very similar. It's interesting. I've been involved with an organisation who run a conference called Sexposed, and they're in London, and they tackle things like pornography. They tackle things like prostitution, LGBT issues, adultery, all these things. And where you go to most big Christian conferences in the UK, there will be thousands of people there, and they struggle to get hundreds because it's not a popular topic and people don't really go to those things. And actually, that should be the biggest conference and the fullest conference, I'd say, of all Christian conferences for pastors. How do we tackle this? How do we support people? And you're right, it's not just LGBT. In fact, that's just a minor thing. It's the porn. I would say that's the biggest thing that we need to tackle. So I would agree that it's not given enough focus. And yeah, if we don't tackle it and if we don't talk about it, it has that capacity to bring us down.
Yeah, and we need to get on top of that. I mean, yeah, because it generates more headlines. So the pride parades, just the obnoxious and the activism, and yes, those are definitely wrong. But the heterosexual community in the church is a hot mess right now with the porn, with everything else. And if we, whatever we are, LGBT, gay identified, heterosexual, but if we're not coming together and we're not honestly dealing with our stuff and we're not getting real and authentic with each other, really repenting before the Lord, what happens when that person walks through our doors for the first time? What would have happened to you if, okay, you're listening to Joyce Meyer, you feel led to go to church, and you went into a church that was just spiritually dead? I mean, just walk us through a little bit of just that thought experiment, Sarah. I mean, obviously the Lord had his hand on you, he would have provided a way, but just what would that have been like for you if you just walked into a place and you're like, what, this is church? Really?
Yeah, I do think about that. And I think it's a challenge, isn't it? Because when I went, I saw what I needed to see, which was people who had the Holy Spirit. And that's what attracted me. And had I gone into a gay affirming church, I know that I wouldn't have seen that. And that's one huge thing. I was actually speaking a couple of weekends ago, and unbeknown to me, the two people came into the meeting from another church. They didn't identify who they were, but it turned out they were pastors of a gay affirming church, and they were challenging what I was saying, and they actually spoke up and said some very wild things. And I thought, this is just so typical of people who don't really know God to come in somewhere else. But the interesting thing they said was, well, we don't believe in the Bible anymore. And so they
literally told you that. They said they do not believe in the Bible.
Said, we don't believe in the Bible because it doesn't represent Jesus well, it doesn't represent God well. And I thought, well, you are spiritually dead because you don't believe in the Bible. And so I felt at that point, wow, I'm glad I didn't go to that church. What would have happened to me had I gone to that church? Would I have got sucked into this kind of happy, God loves everybody, you don't have to change, where the Holy Spirit wasn't there? I don't think I would, but I can see how people could get sucked into it.
Right. Well, in terms, obviously when you take a stand in this area, there's going to be some blowback, but now you've kind of piqued my curiosity. Has most of the resistance that you've encountered for yourself or for your ministry, has it been from the LGBT activist community, or are you getting more of that from other supposed Christians? Where's most of the backlash towards you
Yeah,
come from?
it's really interesting you ask that because the majority is from within the church or from within the Christian community.
Oh,
And I think God's protected us and blessed us uh, from the outsiders at the moment. And for that, I'm really grateful and feel really blessed. But yeah, the biggest challenge comes from within the church. And I find that very sad. I don't know about you. I look at various ministries, Facebook pages, social media, and sometimes you read the comments and you think, are these Christians? They can be vile. They can be very misguided. There's a lot of biblical illiteracy out there as well. And you think, wow, if this is the church, what hope is there?
yeah, we're supposed to be the lamp on the
Mm,
hill. We're supposed to be, the salt that doesn't lose its flavor. That's what
yeah.
we're supposed to be. But it just,
Mm,
yeah, very, very tragic situation. The exciting news is, I definitely do see God on the move. I do see Him raising up people. I do, and you're
mhm,
one of them, by the way, and definitely the work that you're doing over there. So it is encouraging. But just the lackluster and kind of the lukewarm, the kind of
mm,
apathetic Christian culture that we're in, that definitely needs to be. But we need to be that lamp on the hill. We need to be, and it's not about us; it's the Lord working through us. But if anything, to be willing vessels for Him to
mhm.
work through,
Yeah.
kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
We need to be something different, and we need to be confident that the Holy Spirit in us is attractive enough for people to want to come to Christ. And I think too many churches are and outside of LGBT thinking that it's got to be a worship performance as opposed to worship. And so I think sometimes we're so fearful, we so want to fill our pews with people um, that ticks a box. Whereas actually what we want to be doing is actually attracting people through, like you say, being a light on a hill, being filled with the Spirit.
So, Sarah, I just feel led. This wasn't initially in part of my plan, but I would like to take a moment for you, if you don't mind. I would like to give you an opportunity to speak to somebody listening or watching that is at a later stage in their life, and they're either it could be they're feeling a call from the Lord and they're not really sure about it, or B, they're just so disillusioned with kind of the end of the conveyor belt of what the LGBT life has done
Mhm,
for them, but they have no hope. They don't see a way out. They don't see how they could. So I would just like to, whatever the Lord puts
mhm,
on your heart, but just give you a moment to be able to speak directly to that person that might be listening. That is just okay. It's too late for me. I've been here so long. I've been this way for so long. I've been in this life so
mhm,
long. I can't get
mhm.
out.
I think the key thing I'd say is that God's had His hand on their life since they were born, and we're told in the Bible that God has plans for us, and God's plans. I was like Jeremiah said earlier, I was actually 49 when I came back to Christ, and He'd had His hands on my life all that time. And looking back, I can see it. So I would say to anybody that God has still got a plan for you, and you can be 70, 80, 90, and He's still got a plan for you, and He will make a way. And I have seen Him make a way for other people. I know He's made that way for me. But I think our issue as humans is we try to overthink it and we try to make the plans for ourselves. So I would say to anybody um, listening, one, if you want to talk, I will talk to anybody and encourage you, but also one day at a time, 1 minute at a time, and seek Him. Don't seek the end of your relationship. Don't seek to get everything right first. One of my mistakes was I felt I had to go and talk to my partner before I could invite Jesus into my life. I could have invited Jesus into my life and then sorted all that out. So you don't have to wait. But I would say just pursue Him, pursue relationship with Him, find out who He is, and trust Him, and He makes the way. And honestly, I can't give a full story, but I can say that for one person, it was literally a hurricane that came that helped them to get out of a situation that they were in. God can do anything.
Well, Sarah, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. This has been an incredible interview. I'm so glad you're able to make it, and even taking the time. I don't the time difference. I don't even want to know how late at night is in the UK right now. I'm so glad you're able to join us. But please do tell us, though, for anybody that's listened that would like to get in touch with you, get to know more about your ministry, the book. So, how can somebody reach out to you, or where can they find more information about you if they would like to pursue
Well,
that?
our website is transformedbygodslove.com. So anybody can come to our website and can contact us. I'm sure if people contacted Love and Truth Network that you'd be able to pass on our details. And we're on
Happily.
Facebook, we're on Instagram, but probably best to come through the website and drop us an email or use our contact form.
No, absolutely. And again, the name of the latest book is Smoke and Mirrors, A Church Deceived Over Sexuality. It is available on Amazon, so definitely would encourage anybody to check that out. Very much needed, very sage advice for the time that we're living in. So we want to thank you again for joining us through Love and Truth Network, through Transforming Congregations. And Sarah, thank you again. God bless you. And we'll look forward to having you back on the program
Thank you,
sometime.
Jeremiah. It's been great. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Love and Truth Network podcast. To listen to or watch future episodes, please check us out at loveandtruthnetwork.com/podcast. Also, you can subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, and we look forward to seeing you in a future episode.